Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to RPG Speak. I'm your host, the Mexinadian, or Anthony, and today we are going to be talking about a subject that I covered on my YouTube channel a little bit back as my first top 5 video, and that's going to be my personal favorite top 5 non-D&D games. I made this list a little bit ago, just because I was trying to branch out on my channel a little bit, get some more stuff going, but also because there are a lot, and I mean a lot, of tabletop role-playing games. Like, I'm sure if you listen to this podcast, I'm sure you know that already, that there's a cubic fuckload of tabletop role-playing games, but a lot of people don't know. A lot of people are only really aware of Dungeons & Dragons, as that is the most well-known of the tabletop RPGs. Obviously, it's the biggest, it's the most well-known. That's how most people get introduced to tabletop role-playing. And so I wanted to kind of introduce as many people as possible to, to a different form or a different system, different kind of game, stuff like that for tabletop RPGs that isn't necessarily D&D. I think at least one fantasy, like medieval fantasy game on here. Other than that, it's pretty much all entirely, different universes, and then, like sci-fi, post-apocalyptic stuff like that. And I have played every single one of these games, mind you. I didn't just throw a list of random, I didn't just throw a random list of tabletop RPGs and, Google some shit. I mean, I did do that. Don't get me wrong. I did Google some shit, but I have played all of these games specifically for a certain amount of time. That varies between all of them. Number 4 definitely varies from my number 1 spot. So, that's it's a little bit of preface there. So we're just gonna get into it with number 5, which is Shadowrun. Now, Shadowrun, if you guys don't know, was published in 1989 by FASA, and it's a science fantasy tabletop role-playing game set in a fictional universe in the near future, where you've got, this combination of cybernetics and magic, and then, fantasy creatures are combined there. So you got trolls, orcs, elves, dwarves, stuff like that. But they all get, mushed together with this whole sci-fi, cybernetic, cyberpunk 2077 vibe, where you've got, you don't have classes, you got archetypes such as fixers, deckers, adepts, and, street samurais, which, as we know, is the most noble of all of the players. But I put this one at number 5 because I didn't get to play a lot of it in my time, largely because it was, I don't want to say it was complicated for, my DM to run. I'm never going to run it because it's just, I've never been a giant sci-fi person per se. But I do like Shadowrun because it is a mixture of fantasy and sci-fi. I just never got to play a lot of it because the group that I was going to play it with, we got to the point where there was too many conflicting schedules. And then, we got to a point where, our DM couldn't, our DM couldn't get the rules down properly in time for us to be able to play it, well. And then our group just got a bit too big for us to run it. And it was a bunch of, things that went wrong that prevented us from playing the game. But from what I did get to play of it in other games and stuff like that, as like one-shots and stuff like that, I really enjoyed it. Because like I said, I like fantasy, and I do like this combination of sci-fi and fantasy, where, you can still use, modern-esque and futuristic type of weapons, but you can also, cast a fireball and shit like that. So it was really fun, and I wouldn't consider it a game for people that are just starting to play, because it is fairly complicated. But if you're, moderate to adept at tabletop RPGs and you haven't played it yet, I would suggest giving it a chance. Just because of what it is, it's almost a limit. I won't say it's a limitless universe, but it's pretty damn close. And not only that, it's incredibly popular too. The game has 8 video games for it. Like, it's got 40 novels for it. Okay, no random average run-of-the-mill tabletop role-playing game is going to just get 40 books written about it. Like, it's not going to happen. Even Dungeons and Dragons doesn't have 40 novels. Like, not player books, novels. It doesn't have 40 novels or 8 video games about it. You know, I mean, it's also got a collectible card game. It's got 2 miniature-based tabletop war games. Like, D&D doesn't even have that. So I just think it's a really good, game to run if you. It's a good game to play in if you are into sci-fi and fantasy at the same time. Like I said, me personally, I'm not the biggest sci-fi person. Games like Halo and stuff like that, they never really appealed to me, just because it was sci-fi. But I still played them, so I highly recommend Shadowrun for anybody who is looking for something different than D&D or fantasy in general. But you're also you want to get away from fantasy, but you want to keep you want to get away from total fantasy, but you want to keep that little bit of fantasy in there because you know how to work with it. But it's not total fantasy. You know what I'm saying? I think you know what I'm saying. I'm just spouting nonsense at this point. So let's get to number 4, which is Traveler. Traveler is a game created. I say created. It was developed, published in 1977 by Game Designers Workshop. And it runs on the GURPS D20 and D20 system, as well as various other role-playing systems. I was actually shocked in my research about the game how many other role-playing systems it actually runs on. I think it's in total, I think it's 7 to 10 at least systems that it runs on, and it's kind of fucked. But it just goes to show you the kind of flexibility that this game gives you. And the game, if you don't know, is a game where you create characters that travel between star systems, where you can get into space battles, you can do trading between solar systems and shit like that, explore different star systems and solar systems and stuff like that. And your characters aren't defined solely by the need to increase their skills and abilities. They are driven by, or they're defined by by stuff like achievements, titles, political power, all that stuff. And this is another one where I never really got to play a lot of. I got to play a one shot of it with pre-made characters the DM made. I think the longest time I actually played this was when my DM, my personal DM. Oh, look, fancy. The DM for my personal group that I play with the most, he tried running it, and we spent 8 hours just creating our characters and stuff like that. Because with the Traveler, when you're creating your character, you're not just creating your character, but you're also creating your own planet. Meaning you create by pure randomness. By the way, it is this whole planet development or creation thing is completely random. So you roll dice for, I believe it's the size of your planet, how good the air quality is, how much water you have on that planet, how survivable your planet is, stuff like that. And that also helps define your character. And it's got an incredible combat system from the one shot I played, where it's incredible and incredibly in depth. Where most games, like any game, you can die from, one stab to the chest with a sword or one shot at the beginning of the game. But in this game, no matter how far in you are, you can die from a single shot. In D&D, you can, once you level 1, level 2, you can die from one shot from, good enough roll. but once you level up to like 10, 15, stuff like that, it takes a lot to kill you. Like, it's almost impossible to kill you with just one shot when you start leveling up in D&D. But this game, doesn't matter how far along you are, you can die from a single bullet, which gives this whole realism aspect to it of you can't just, be stupid and charge in guns blazing. You have to actually be tactical. You have to come up with a plan. You have to discuss with your group about what you're going to do. There's something on my monitor and I do not like it. Anyways, so yeah, it brings a sense of realism to the game that, other D&D games, that D&D and other tabletop RPGs don't bring. And it's just another one of the reasons why I like it, because I've always been a role player instead of like a role play based tabletop RPGer as opposed to a combat based tabletop RPGer. If that makes any sense. I've always been more into roleplay than combat. So with this in-depth combat system where I actually have to be tactical to do it, it fits me well because I'm always able to, in character, talk with my group and stuff like that and roleplay, tactics and stuff like that. I can roleplay talking our way out of stuff, combat situations, talking your way out of a bad situation, stuff like that. So it really does kind of suit me. Not to say I don't like combat. I love combat, obviously. You've always got to find that, you've always got to find that good balance between combat and role-playing. Because while it is called a tabletop role-playing game, the roles you play are generally inherently combat-based. So you have, in D&D, you've got fighters, you've got paladins, you've got I almost said ninjas, you've got monks, you've got rogues, stuff like that. All of those, classes and characters are specifically designed for combat. Whereas you've got, your clerics and stuff like that who aren't designed to fight. They're more designed to talk with people and be very charismatic. They're not meant to go guns blazing into a fight. So it's always important to find that balance, and I do think Traveler does a really good job of that, especially with its combat system where you can't just fight everything. You actually have to talk things out with certain NPCs. If you get caught by by police or something like that, you actually have to talk with them. You can't just fight your way out of it and stuff like that. So it really suits me as kind of more of a role player than a combat oriented player. And that actually leads me into number 3, which is Heroes Unlimited. Heroes Unlimited was developed. I keep saying that like I'm talking about video games. Published in 1984 by Palladium Books for the Megaversal system. It's a game that takes place in a comic book-like world where you create your own superhero, essentially, and fight comic book villains. You can make like actual comic book villains. Like you can throw the Joker in there or something like that. But it's a comic book like world, so your supervillains are going to, they're going to kind of mirror your superheroes. They're going to have powers. They're going to have some sort of power that defines them, some sort of, trait, mental quality or physical trait that defines them and stuff like that. But with this game, your players create their characters based off of 8 attributes, being their IQ, mental endurance, mental affinity, strength, prowess, beauty, and speed. Plus, those are the 8 attributes. IQ, which I know in modern day IQ doesn't really mean much, but with your IQ, you've got, that's basically your smarts. Your mental endurance is basically how much shit you can take. It's how much stuff you can put up with before you just say, fuck this shit, I'm out, and stuff like that. Same with your mental affinity. It shows, it's basically how strong your brain is. Strength and prowess go without saying, basically your strength and nimbleness, stuff like that. Beauty is basically your charisma, and speed is you know, how fast you can do stuff, how fast you can, you know, activate your powers, how fast you can jump into fights, stuff like that. Plus, you got your education level, which is, you know, the smarter that you are, the better your superhero is going to be with certain powers, certain skills, stuff like that. And structural damage, which is basically your hit points, essentially. You know, certain heroes probably have, you know, higher structural damage than other ones, you know. Superman's got a much better structural damage threshold than Batman does, you know. Batman, if he got shot, you know, he gets shot, you know, it hurts, it'll hurt, and he could possibly die. But if Superman got shot, you know, it's nothing to him. Plus, and that's not just that stuff. You know, you've got the main defining quality of your character, which is your powers. So you can have powers like telekinesis, invisibility, fire, disintegration. There are actually like hundreds of powers in Heroes Unlimited that you can choose from. And the kicker to this is that in this game, superheroes are actually outlaws. You know, superheroes are essentially considered vigilantes in this world. So it's kind of, you know, it's kind of like DC, where you've all of your heroes like, you know, Batman, Green Arrow, stuff like that. They're considered vigilantes. But later on, you know, as their stories progress and whatnot, they become part of the Justice League, and the Justice League eventually becomes the main superhero league that are, you know, by law allowed to fight crime. And you have something like that in this game, except anyone who's not part of that, you know, superhero league is considered a vigilante, no matter what you do, no matter who you are. In fact, when, you know, my group played this, I had a character whose power was it could increase and decrease the kinetic energy of anything that he wanted to. And there was this big firefight in a park between police and some bad guys, you know, criminals and stuff like that. And my character, along with everybody else, ran into the fight. And once it was done, we actually ended up getting arrested for being vigilantes. So it's actually pretty interesting when you think about it. Because, you know, even Marvel has got something like that, you know, with Daredevil, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, stuff like that. So it kind of brings a balance to, it brings a sense of, you know, a sense of alertness, I guess, to where you have to be tactical in when you use your powers, how you use your powers, what situations you should use your powers in, stuff like that. So it could be very roleplay centric and combat centric as well, just like Traveler. So, you know, I had a lot of fun with Heroes Unlimited. Unfortunately, as I have been told, especially I've been told in the video, plus, you know, just in general, and I kind of knew this already, but a lot of people don't like Heroes Unlimited, or at the very least, they think it's the worst of all the hero-based tabletop RPGs. And I'm not entirely sure why. I don't know if it's because it's, you know, uses the Palladium system or what, but personally, I really enjoyed the game. We played a few sessions with it, and it actually, like, I was actually able to picture my superhero, and my superhero was, he looked like a, you know, like an urban vigilante, I guess. I didn't really do myself any favors with it, but, you know, he wore jeans, then he wore a shirt and a vest, then he had a bandana, sunglasses, and a hat. You know, he was basically essentially like a third-rate vigilante superhero in the, you know, in the hood, essentially. So it's I enjoyed it. You know, I recommend it for a lot of people. There's definitely a lot of better hero games out there, but this one was incredibly fun. I enjoyed it a lot. If you really like superheroes and superhero games, I definitely recommend this. And then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you know, we have Heroes Unlimited, which is kind of a more lighthearted game in its, basis, we do a complete 180 and go to number 2, which is Call of Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu was published by Chaosium in 1981, and it's a role-playing game inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. And this game, holy shit. I've played it quite a bit, and holy shit is it good. First of all, Call of Cthulhu, it jumped out on the scene, and it has since become it's become just as iconic of a tabletop RPG as D&D is. You're still gonna, when you think of tabletop RPGs, you're going to think of D&D first, but not too far behind that is Call of Cthulhu. And that's just because H.P. Lovecraft, that his work has been, his work is so well known throughout the world that when somebody created a D&D-esque, tabletop role-playing game based off of it, based off of his monsters, it just blew up. It uses the basic role-playing system. It uses pretty much the same system as, D&D 5th edition does. But this one is where your players get taken into a mysterious realm where it's almost identical, it's identical to ours. This game, the world's identical to ours in a sense where it's literally identical. Everything is the same. The only difference is that humans fear and worship aliens as gods. So you've got Cthulhu's and stuff. You got Cthulhu's. There's only one Cthulhu. Sorry, Dark Lord. But they worship Cthulhu, and there's all of these monsters and horrors, stuff like that you got to fight. Once you go deeper into the world, you're going to find more horrors and beasts and whatnot. And these creatures dominate the world. And if you got a really good DM who knows what they're doing and they run this game, you can create... I think Call of Cthulhu is responsible for some of the greatest horror tabletop role-playing campaigns in history. Just because of the world it's set in. You can make you can create this whole world that is based around monsters. It's based around... It's legit just based around aliens and monsters like Cthulhu. You've got aliens and monsters. You got aliens and monsters like Cthulhu. You've got... I already forgot the name of the, ones that control your mind and shit like that. You've got all of... You've got... It's literally the perfect game for a great horror tabletop role-playing game campaign. And I personally enjoyed the shit out of it. There has been very few tabletop RPGs in my life. Actually, I don't think there has ever been one in my life, except for Call of Cthulhu, that has actually made me turn around and look over my shoulder because I thought there was a giant fucking monster squid behind me just staring at me. I turn around expecting to see a werewolf or something behind me, and it's incredible. You can get completely lost in this game. And so I really recommend it to anybody who's really trying to expand their horizons. Because most tabletop role-playing games aren't inherently dark, but Call of Cthulhu is. And so if you're looking for an inherently dark tabletop role-playing game, I highly recommend Call of Cthulhu. And not even just a tabletop role-playing game. It's got 2 card games, 6 video games, most of which are pretty good. And it's got no shortage of editions because it's got more editions than D&D does. It's on its 7th edition right now, which is crazy considering D&D can't... Well, I guess it's kind of not because D&D came out like 2 or 3 years beforehand, but it's still incredible that Call of Cthulhu is 2 editions past Dungeons and Dragons. And I've only ever played the 7th edition of Call of Cthulhu. But I imagine if you play any of the other ones, it's going to be just as good. But we go from horror games to post-apocalyptic games with our number 1 pick. Well, my number 1 pick, which is Deadlands. If you guys have been following my YouTube channel for any amount of time since I started doing, tabletop RPG content on my channel, you would know that Deadlands is my favorite tabletop RPG in history. It was created in 1996 by the Pinnacle, published in 1996 by the Pinnacle Entertainment Group. It uses the D20 system, and since being published, it's become the most popular post-apocalyptic tabletop RPG, and like I said, my personal favorite tabletop RPG of all time. The game takes place in the 19th century United States in a world where the Civil War never ended. So the whole story behind it is, the North and South are fighting each other, but something, I can't remember the exact story. I have videos of this up on my channel. But the whole story is that that one of the sides did something to a Native American tribe. I know, shocker. But they did something to a Native American tribe, and the shaman of one of these tribes performed a ritual which raised the four horsemen of hell. So the four horsemen being pestilence, famine, death, and war. Raised them, and they are called the Reckoners in Deadlands. And what they did was they tore through they tore through the world and essentially put the world into a stage. They created horrors. They created monsters and beasts that people can only dream of. And not only that, there was the discovery of ghost rock, which is a substance that is far stronger than normal fuel. It's stronger than nuclear power. So what governments did was they got their hands on it, and then when they started fighting each other again, eventually they created ghost rock. They basically created ghost rock nukes, and they dropped them on each other and just decimated the world. And wherever one of these nukes got dropped what was created. They created maelstroms, which are essentially incredibly irradiated. These areas are so irradiated that you can see the glows of them for miles. And so what had happened is, what happens is you've got the four horsemen, and you've got these ghost rock nukes creating these horrible places and bad monsters and stuff like that. And you get to create your character in your own image. You actually don't. There are archetypes. Don't get me wrong. You've got road warriors. You've got Templars, stuff like that. So you've got archetypes that you can be essentially and base your character off of. But there are no set classes. You can literally have this happened before because one of my players, when I run this game, one of my former players actually had a character whose occupation was a burger joint guy. So his whole character was essentially a charismatic character who couldn't fight for shit because he worked at a burger joint and was basically, 115-pound soaking wet teenager. But he could talk your ear off for a long time and get you to buy shit that you didn't even realize you wanted. Or you could be on the other end of the spectrum. Like right now, we're playing Deadlands in the group that Renavion runs, and one of the players, she has a character who's incredibly strong and tough and is just really into fighting, but she also has a brother who is, who's dead, but she doesn't think that. She's crazy, so she thinks her brother is still there and that everybody else can see him, when in retrospect, nobody else can see him. So you can literally do anything. Like my character's a soldier, an entrepreneur. So you've got so many. Basically, the sky's the limit. Because you've got, when you create your character, you can make it however you want with attributes. I think you've got, what is it? I think it's 8 or 9 attributes. And each attribute has like 8, 9, 10 different skills that you can put points into, essentially. And these points determine how many dice you run of a single die type, because this game, it is run off of, it's run off of each attribute has a die type and how many dice you roll for that attribute. So you can have one attribute, you can have two, you can roll 3d10 for that attribute roll, but underneath it you've got skills, and you can have less than or more than the attribute that, the die type that your attribute is, or how many die you roll. So you can roll survival, but say for survival, your attribute is 4d12, but under the skill, you've only got 2 points in it. So then you roll 2d12, if that makes any sense. I'm doing a horrible job of describing it, but it is genuinely one of my favorite games, because being a DM, it's almost, you've got almost zero, there's no restraints, because Deadlands is considered a meat grinder game. Deadlands is a game where it almost specifically tells you that you are there to kill the players. Games like D&D, and almost every other game I mentioned on here, Traveler, Heroes Unlimited, the DM is not there to kill the players. The DM is there to create a story for the players to go through and enjoy. And if a player just so happens to die because, they rolled poorly and the DM just happened to roll really good, stuff like that, that stuff happens. It's supposed to happen. In Deadlands, you are there. The DM, also known as the Marshal in this game, is there specifically to kill the players. He is supposed to, he or she, I already forgot the word. But they are supposed to, they're there to kill the players. They're supposed to throw them in situations where the players have to fight their asses off to get out of, because it's a post-apocalypse. It's an apocalyptic world where anything can happen. You could be attacked. Like, there are monsters in this game that are just like basically two creatures merged with each other. You've got Shraks, which are basically giant land sharks. You've got Trogs, which are trolls combined with frogs. You've got Bloodwolves, which are vampire werewolves. You've got so many monsters in this game that you can encounter that you can throw at your players, and they've got to fight to survive because of it being an apocalypse. Apocalypses, you are meant to fight to survive, and that's what this game does. And there's also vehicles, like actual vehicles. You got motorcycles, there's hovercrafts, you can buy a sports car or like a sedan, you can buy, which I think is just called an economy car in this game. Plus there's no shortage of weapons. You got, you can have a musket, shotguns, you can have rifles, assault rifles, you can have LMGs in this game, or you can fight, prehistoric Native American type style, spears, bow and arrows, crossbows, stuff like that. There's no shortage of ways to play or run this game, and that is why it is my favorite game, because I've always been a giant fan of apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic type games. That's why Fallout is one of my favorite game series in history. I've always been a fan of apocalyptic games. So that's just my take. That's just my take on Deadlands. Just like I said, just for the sheer fact that I am an apocalypse game lover. And plus Deadlands, it's easy to run, essentially. I'm not going to say it's easy. I wouldn't recommend it for a first-time DM, but I would recommend anybody to run or play it if you're looking to completely branch out from fantasy. And and like I said, it's fairly easy to run if you're a DM. The world is easy to craft because it's basically the United States. Sure, you can put your players in different countries and stuff like that, but the game itself is based in the United States. As far as I know, there's nothing really too known about what's happened with other countries except for Canada to an extent. But there's almost no limits to what you can do with this game, from creating your character all the way to creating the world. So that's my take on it, like I said. And those are my personal top 5 non-D&D games games that you can substitute for D&D, essentially. Or if you just want to branch out from D&D, either or is fine. And if you going back through this list, you can tell just by this list how many different forms of tabletop RPGs there are. You've got Shadowrun and Traveler. You've got your sci-fi Heroes Unlimited. You've got your hero comic book type Call of Cthulhu. You've got your horror tabletop, and Deadlands. You got your post-apocalypse top, and that's just like the start of that's just the tip of the iceberg of when you go of like how many games there are. You've got like there are tabletop role-playing games based off of like movies and shit like that. Men in Black have like I think 2 tabletop role-playing games. I think there's even a Mission Impossible tabletop role-playing game. War of the Worlds, I believe has a tabletop role-playing game. I think Hello Kitty has a tabletop role-playing game, for Christ's sake. Like there is nothing, I don't think, in this world that people have not created a tabletop role-playing game for. Dark Souls has a tabletop role-playing game. Fallout's got a tabletop role-playing game. Shit, I think there's even I think at one point there was talk of the Elder Scrolls having a tabletop role-playing game or something, if it's not already out. But yeah, so obviously these, like I said, these are just my top 5. These are just my 5 favorite picks, and my personal recommendations. Obviously, there are significantly more options to pick from, and I highly recommend you guys go check do your research, look to see what you want to play or run, and then try and find a group to play with. Or if you already have a group, see if that group see if that group wants to do it, stuff like that. Because there's nothing wrong with branching out, obviously, with anything, sports and video games, stuff like that, people are always going to be loyalists to something. There are always going to be a shit ton of D&D loyalists. There's going to be Call of Cthulhu loyalists. There's going to be Deadlands loyalists. But there's nothing wrong with branching out and expanding your tabletop RPG horizons. Like me, I've been playing tabletop RPGs for over a decade now. Actually, I think it's probably been about a decade since I was a freshman in high school. So, which, realistically doesn't say a lot. I've been graduated for like 7 years now, which is actually kind of mind-boggling to think. Let me do the quick math. 6-7 years, about, yeah. It's kind of mind-boggling to think of. And I know, some of you listening to this are going to be like, you've been graduated for 7 years. I've graduated in 1983, stuff like that. But like, that's not the point of this. My point is that you can be a loyalist to any game you want, but you can't spend your entire time playing that game, or else it's going to end up getting stale and you're not going to like it anymore. You can't spend your entire time playing D&D and expect to enjoy it the same exact amount of time as you did the last time. Tabletop RPGs are just like video games. They become boring after playing for a while. You can't spend, like, there are people who will spend like 500 hours straight playing like Skyrim or something, but then they'll end up getting bored of it. Sometimes it takes longer for people to get bored of the game. Sometimes it takes almost immediately for people to get bored of the game. But eventually you're going to get bored of it, and you're not going to have anything to do because you weren't willing to take the time to, expand your horizons. It happened to me with YouTube. I got stuck doing the same thing for years, and it got stale, bored, and at one point I just stopped caring. And that's eventually going to happen. It's like with tabletop RPGs, it's eventually going to happen. You're going to stop caring because you're going to end up just going through the motions, and it's just going to be the same shit, just different days. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with expanding your horizons. I've recommended it for everything. I do this, and so tabletop RPGs are no different. Expand your horizons, whether it be from my list or a completely different list, or just, one that you found at your local game store. Just as long as you're doing something different, there's nothing wrong with doing the same thing. It's just when you do something different, that same thing becomes more special. And that's about all I have for you guys today. Sorry this was a bit of a rambling mess. Like I said, this whole podcast thing is still, I mean, it's not new to me. I've had several podcasts in the past, but this whole solo podcast thing is still a bit new to me. So it's going to take some time, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are going to be like, stop rambling, just get to the point, stuff like that. Just bear with me, please. I'm trying my best here, okay? It's whatever, though, so like I said, thank you guys for listening. This podcast is now also available, just in case you didn't know, if you're still listening on Acast. Some of you guys might be listening on these websites now, but as of right now, RPG Speak is officially available on YouTube and Spotify. Hopefully we'll be accepted by Amazon Music soon, and eventually we're going to move to iTunes as well. So keep a lookout for that. I will keep you guys updated on my Twitter, twitter.com/the_Mexinadian. Also, I will let you guys know for any updates in, any new episodes. And like I said, my last episode, I got some big things coming, so stay tuned for that. Also, I do have merch available, finally. It's not the first merch drop I've ever done, and I wouldn't even really call it a merch drop. It's really just, some shirts. It's literally just like 2 shirts and a mug and some stuff like that, designed by humans. So there will be links for that in the descriptions of the YouTube video, Spotify video, for basically this entire episode. There'll be links. And I've also got a Tiltify Streamlabs, not even Tiltify. Tiltify's for charities. That's the word I was looking for. Tiltify's for charities, which, by the way, reminds me, I still do have an open campaign for veterans, a Combat Veterans Hope. It is a very good charity that I vetted myself, where it helps combat veterans that are coming home from overseas get reintegrated back into society, with treatments, programs, stuff like that help them reach out to their neighbors, get the care they need to help with any PTSD or any other mental problems they have after coming overseas. And along with that, I also do have it's kind of weird to say this after the charity thing, but I do also have my Streamlabs merch that you can only get on Streamlabs. It is some t-shirts, coffee mugs, laptop pouches, stuff like that. Everything's pretty fairly priced too, so I recommend it. But if you're going to give me money for any reason, I recommend giving me money for a Combat Veterans Hope, as that is a cause that means a lot to me. I've done some stuff with the Wounded Warrior Project in the past, and I expanded to a Combat Veterans Hope, hoping to do anything, So thank you guys once again for watching, listening. I don't know. You could be on YouTube watching, listening to this. Yeah, I'm also on YouTube. I got this on YouTube as well. Don't judge me. But yes, thank you guys so much for listening. Hopefully I enlightened you guys and, inspired you to expand your horizons with this list. Not even just with this list. Like I said, there are hundreds of other tabletop RPGs out there for you to explore. So with that being said, finally, thank you guys for listening. And I will talk to you all later. Have a good day, everybody.